everybody. Just waiting to see if anyone else is going to connect today. Okay, hi everybody, Mark Hoyle here from Northern Archaeological Associates. This is day 3, workshop day 3, to coincide with the release of Contact, Concord and Conquest, NAA's new monograph, which is freely downloadable from the Archaeological Data Services website. I'm going to be looking for the next 3 days to show you how to illustrate small finds. What we're going to be looking at today, so hopefully you can see. You can see I've got some gloves on. These are essential simply because you don't want to be handling the objects. The kind of oil from your skin gets contaminated. Sometimes when they're being conserved, they might have chemical gloves to make sure that your object's safe, hands safe. Again, we've got trumpet brooch here. Okay, trumpet brooch is one of the best known Romano British brooches. It's very rarely found outside of Britain. Developed in the military areas of the province in the late 1st century AD. It's the most popular in the early 2nd century. It's called a trumpet brooch because, I don't know if you can see here, the kind of what they call the head of the bow. Okay, the bow is this part here. The head of it opens out and kind of resembles the trumpet mouthpiece itself. So we've got the foot of the brooch here, the kind of bow, the head. Obviously you have the pin. Here's the catch plate. And I don't know if you can see this in the back there, hopefully. You've got the kind of the axis bar itself. And what we're going to be doing over the next 3 days is kind of illustrating this, or looking how to illustrate such a lovely small find as such. Now, if you're lucky, like I am, you will get some specialist notes, specialists who I've worked with for a while, and they kind of give me details of how they'd like the kind of brooches laid out for public. You might not be sure what views to show. And again, I'm going to kind of go through that today and kind of how we kind of lay the objects out. So what I'm going to do now, luckily you won't have to see my face anymore. I'm just going to turn the camera around and kind of get you set up on a different tripod, fingers crossed, and hopefully the brooch. So I have the brooch here, piece of drafting film. Now, what we're going to look at today is the views. Okay, so you've got the principal view, or the view that will be most recognisable, and obviously the side view itself, where we can get the detail of the kind of latch plate and the pin. Now, what we're going to do is use kind of gridded paper, as we've got here. Now, the reason behind that is that when we're kind of doing the different views, the kind of side view, top view, front view, they'll grid. Now, the kind of best way to do this is just to kind of really start. Lots of different set squares. What we mentioned yesterday about kind of sticking wooden blocks on. We've kind of got ones here with spirit levels on, larger ones as well. But I prefer just using the smaller ones, obviously, for the small objects. And all we're going to start to do is very similar to the pottery drawing yesterday. We're going to go around the object very, very carefully. And we're going to kind of do a join the dots all the way around the object itself. Now, we need to make sure this is accurate, but also we need to make sure that the brooch itself is kind of secure on the drawing board, doesn't move. Again, take your time with this. There's no rush, you just need to make sure it's kind of accurate. Now, we're drawing this at 1:1 at the moment, but before we start to ink it in, I scan the object in, I scan the drawing in itself, and then we're going to blow it up twice the size, okay, 2:1. That'll become clear, hopefully, soon. And the reason for that is so we can add the detail in at a much larger scale. We will ink it in at 2:1, and then we will reduce it down for final publication at 1:1 for a monograph. Okay, so we're just going to kind of work around. And what you would do is work around the whole object. So I'm just going to gently remove this from the drawing board, so hopefully you can see on here we have the start of its shape. Okay, so it's kind of starting to come in like this. Now, again, once we've done the kind of full view itself, we would then turn it around and make sure we kind of line up. Obviously, you've got, and we just need to make sure that all of the details show you, which is a larger scale version of it. Okay, so you have the brooch going up at 2:1. Now, to get the detail in, okay, you can use some dividers themselves. Make sure that the touching the object, and you can kind of make sure, obviously it's twice the size up. I've drawn this 1:1 and then blown it up on a scanner, printed it out, and kind of have a pencil drawing. So you can kind of make sure that the measurements, okay, you need to take your time with this. Just go around, make sure that all the measurements are correct. So when you kind of plotting it out, everything matches up. So we kind of have here the two principal views that we're going to be looking at or working with and inking over the next couple of days. Now, we kind of have proportional dividers. Yes, they are very handy for this. You can also use digital calipers themselves. Now, once we've got all the detail in, what we can start to do is kind of ink it in. Now, we use permatrace for this. If you haven't got permatrace, you can use drafting film, you can use tracing paper, anything where you can kind of see through to the original or the kind of worked drawing itself. Now, we've got pens to do this. I will go through this tomorrow when I actually start to ink it in, but today I'm going to try and explain why we're kind of putting the detail in twice the size on this kind of test sheet itself. Now, again, this is where we're looking at the pens. Okay, I use rotring pens, the repeater graphs that were talked about yesterday. And what we're going to do is use a 0.5 pen for the outline. Okay, so the outline of the object itself. And then we're going to use smaller pens, say 2.5 or a 1.8, which will give us the kind of stippling for the detail. Now, a lot of people use this or use this technique in Illustrator, Photoshop. I still prefer to hand draw Smallfinds simply because I don't think you can get the kind of quality and the little accentuated touches that you can pick up from hand-drawn illustration. Now, you may remember on day one, I kind of mentioned the reason why Smallfinds are still hand-drawn as opposed to just using photographs. Well, hopefully that might become clear over the next day or two, okay? You can take a photograph of an object, you can pick out the colour and the detail, but again, it's just an image from a source. Now, the specialists obviously picked this kind of brooch for a reason to illustrate. She may mention in the notes what details need to be picked out, certain details that can be dropped in the background and still there, but not necessarily kind of standing out. Photographs are very hard. You're manipulating the image itself in Photoshop to kind of achieve the same effect. It's quicker to do a hand-drawn illustration than it is most of the time to take a photograph, a good photograph for publication. Okay, not a lot of units do this anymore, and it's sadly a skill that's getting lost. I was in a discussion over the weekend with some of my friends on the graphics archaeology group, and we were kind of discussing, why Smallfinds aren't necessarily drawn anymore for publication, but monograph series, luckily they're still produced. So what we'll be doing is kind of drawing around the outline. Now, I'm going to just do a very small section on this kind of background gridded paper. Tomorrow, I will do it with permatrace on top, but I just kind of want to show you today why we kind of blow it up twice the size for reproduction and reduce it down. Now, again, as I said, you would go around the outline using a kind of 0.5 pen. Now, hopefully you can see that's kind of starting to stand out clear here. Again, you just go around very, very carefully and make sure you're kind of picking in all the information. Now, I would do this to the whole outline. Again, today, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to do a section. And then we pick a slightly thinner pen, a 0.35, for kind of some of the internal details, so you can kind of see the spring itself. And I'm just picking that out in a slightly heavier pen. Now, when we're drawing Smallfinds, we always make sure that the light source itself is kind of coming from the top left-hand corner. So all of the shading is going to kind of end up on the bottom edge. It's going to get lighter around the kind of top edges themselves. Hopefully you can get strong raking light to do that. I put one on. I don't know if you can kind of see. I've got a light source here. I'm not going to put it on the camera today because it may kind of interfere with the camera. So what I'm going to show you now is the kind of detail. Now, if we have the drawing at a kind of very smaller scale, to add the detail in, you may only get one or two small fine dots. Blowing it up twice the size allows you the freedom to be able to go through the drawing itself and kind of start to add some stippling detail. Now, remembering the light's coming from the top left, so what we're going to start to do is start off lightly, okay? Make sure that the kind of pen's not going to blob or bleb, because sometimes you get kind of larger dots. And we're just going to start to fill in some of the detail around the spring area itself. Now, take your time with this. Again, practice. If you've never stippled before, okay, I recommend you create a 3x3 grid and use the different pens and start off as a really, really light square and kind of try and darken it up. Now, what we're trying to achieve is the kind of shading, okay, the shading of the spring and the coil itself. Obviously, where it touches other elements of the object itself, you may get shadows which you created. And what you do is just go around and slowly work your way around the object and start to stipple. Now, you don't want to rush this. Obviously, if you make a mistake, you can start again. If you have a scalpel, they're very, very useful using a 10A blade for just gently scraping the surface of the ink drawing. And as you can see, oops, we'll just smudge that and I'll take that off as well. You can remove the ink. Now, it doesn't affect the permatrace underneath. If you press down too hard, obviously you can take off the surface. But if you just very gently remove the ink, you can start again. Now, you can use lighter fuel to kind of clean it, make sure there's no grease on the surface itself. But these are kind of just little tips and techniques that I've picked up over the years. So again, I've removed some of that. We can add it back in with a thicker pen. But what we're trying to do is just kind of create this kind of light and shade on the object itself, just using very, very small dots. Now, again, a bit like Blue Peter, I created a drawing to kind of show you how this works. Now, I'll try and hold it up. You can see how the dots are kind of creating a shading effect on the object itself. Now, we have some kind of enamel work which would go in here. Again, that would be scanned in and added in Illustrator with a transparency on it. But hopefully you can kind of see we're kind of using lines and dots, and the idea is to just pick out the details subtly to be able to show the details of the trumpet brooch, any kind of markings on it. And we kind of use this at 2:1, reduce it down for publication itself. Hopefully you found that useful today. Again, I will stay online for a few minutes to answer some questions. Do you have any? But thanks for joining us, and look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Okay, so got a few kind of questions coming in here. Sorry about the hands obscuring the pen when I'm drunk. I apologise about that. It's just kind of using the rotaring pens, the 0.18, 0.25 to kind of stipple in. Again, thanks Leslie for that comment. Yeah, the illustrator often sees details specialists missed. Several years ago, I was working on a collection of wooden combs, and in the workshop itself, I asked everybody to just look in detail at the objects. Sometimes I asked them to close their eyes and just kind of gently rub their fingers across. We found stamps on the wooden combs which had never been seen by the specialist before. They'd been placed in the museum, nobody had noticed them, so they took the whole collection of wooden combs and checked through, and they found 50 stamps that no one had found before. So it's always worth kind of looking. The illustrator themselves will probably look at an object and study it in more detail than anybody since the manufacturer, okay? Specialists will look at things in detail, they'll take their weight, the measurements, but they don't necessarily look in minute detail like the illustrator will. And a lot of the time we can pick up lots of information that specialists don't necessarily see or kind of notice, and we can go back and mention it to them, and hopefully they'll include that in the report. And it says here, you don't use stippling on your ceramics. No, I don't, because ceramics are very smooth. A lot of the technique of creating pottery illustrations is very more of a technical approach. It's linear work, so unless it's kind of hand-drawn pot or kind of Iron Age pot, which you would include some of the stipple work in, you don't necessarily waste time or energy or money stippling or shading the pots themselves. You just kind of use lines to indicate the shading itself. Hopefully that's been useful. Thanks very much for joining, and I shall see you all tomorrow. Bye-bye.